Have you ever felt like your entire life is on autopilot? Like you wake up every single morning, drag yourself out of bed, go through the motions, come home, scroll through your phone for 3 hours, and then fall asleep wondering where the day went? And then you do it all over again the next day, and the next, and the next, until weeks turn into months, and months turn into years, and one day you look in the mirror and you barely recognize the person staring back at you. If that hits close to home, stay right here, because today we are going to talk about one of the most powerful books ever written on the subject of personal discipline. It is called How to Be Disciplined by Sheldon Howe. And I am not just going to summarize this book for you. No, I am going to walk you through the journey of a real person who picked up this book at the lowest point of his life and used it to completely transform everything. His name is Ethan, and his story might just change your life too. But before we dive in, let me ask you something. Be honest with yourself right now. How many times have you set a goal and given up within a week? How many times have you told yourself that tomorrow would be different, that tomorrow you would finally start working out, finally start eating healthy, finally start working on that side project, finally start reading more books, finally start becoming the person you always dreamed of being? And how many of those tomorrows actually came? If you are anything like Ethan was 6 months ago, the answer is probably none. And that is okay, because today, right now, in this very moment, something is about to shift. Let me take you to Chicago. It was a cool October evening, the kind of evening where the wind carries the smell of dried leaves and the sky turns that deep amber color just before the sun disappears behind the skyline. Ethan was sitting alone in his small studio apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brownstone building in Lincoln Park. The apartment was nothing special. A bed that doubled as a couch, a tiny kitchen with dishes piled up in the sink, and a desk cluttered with half-finished projects, old coffee cups, and a laptop that had not been closed in days. Ethan was 29 years old. He worked as a junior marketing analyst at a mid-sized company downtown. The job was fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. He made enough money to pay his rent, grab takeout most nights, and occasionally go out with friends on the weekends. From the outside, his life looked perfectly normal, but inside, Ethan was falling apart. He could not remember the last time he felt genuinely excited about anything. Every morning felt like a battle. The alarm would go off at 7, and he would hit snooze at least 3 times before finally rolling out of bed at 7:45, rushing through a shower, skipping breakfast, and barely making it to the office on time. His boss had started noticing. His performance reviews were average at best. And the worst part? Ethan knew he was capable of so much more. He could feel it somewhere deep inside him, this restless energy, this voice that kept whispering, "You are wasting your potential." But knowing you are capable of more and actually doing something about it are two very different things. That particular October evening, Ethan was doing what he did most nights, lying on his bed, scrolling through social media, watching other people live the lives he wished he had. One guy his age had just launched a successful startup. Another had run a marathon. Someone else had traveled to 12 countries in 1 year. And here was Ethan, unable to even wake up on time. He was about to put his phone down and go to sleep when something caught his eye. It was a post from someone he vaguely knew from college. The post was simple, just a photo of a book with a short caption that read, "This book changed my life. If you feel stuck, read it." The book was How to Be Disciplined by Sheldon Howe. Ethan almost scrolled past it. Almost, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the word stuck, because that was exactly how he felt. Stuck, trapped, frozen. He tapped on the photo and read the comments. People were saying things like, "This book rewired my brain," and "I wish I had read this 5 years ago." What a load of nonsense, Ethan muttered to himself. He had read self-help books before, or at least he had bought them. They usually ended up collecting dust on his shelf after the first chapter. But that night, something felt different. Maybe it was the weight of another wasted day. Maybe it was the loneliness of sitting in a dark apartment with nothing to show for his 29 years. Whatever it was, Ethan found himself opening Amazon, searching for the book, and clicking Buy Now before he could talk himself out of it. 3 days later, a small brown package arrived at his door. Ethan tossed it on his desk and forgot about it for 2 more days. It was not until Friday evening, when all his plans had fallen through and he was sitting alone again with nothing to do, that he finally tore open the package and held the book in his hands. It was thinner than he expected. The cover was simple, almost too simple. He flipped it over and read the back. Nothing fancy, no grand promises, just a straightforward message about building discipline one step at a time. "All right," he said to himself, "let us see what all the fuss is about." He grabbed a cup of coffee, sat down at his desk, pushed aside the clutter, and opened the first page. The first chapter was called Set Clear Goals, and from the very first paragraph, Ethan felt something he had not felt in a long time: recognition. It was like the author was speaking directly to him, like Sheldon Howe had somehow looked into Ethan's life and written a chapter specifically about everything he was doing wrong. The book said something that stopped Ethan cold. It said that establishing clear and achievable goals is the foundation of discipline. That goals provide direction and motivation, making it easier to stay focused and measure progress. Ethan put the book down for a moment and stared at the wall. He thought about his own life. When was the last time he had set a real goal? Not a vague wish like, "I want to be successful," or "I want to get in shape." An actual, specific, measurable goal with a deadline and a plan. The answer was never. He had never done that. Not once in his entire life. He had always been a dreamer. Ever since he was a kid, he had big ideas. He wanted to start his own business one day. He wanted to learn graphic design. He wanted to travel the world. He wanted to write a novel. He wanted to run a marathon. He wanted to learn Spanish. The list went on, but none of these dreams ever had a plan attached to them. They were just floating around in his head like clouds, beautiful to look at, but impossible to hold. The book continued with a line that hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "If you do not know where you are going, you will never get there." He read that line 3 times. Each time, it sank a little deeper. "That is my entire life," he whispered. "I have been walking in circles because I never picked a direction." Something shifted inside Ethan at that moment. It was subtle. Not some dramatic movie scene where the music swells and everything changes in an instant. It was quieter than that. It was like a door that had been locked for years suddenly cracking open just a little, letting in a thin beam of light. He closed the book, stood up, and walked to his desk. He dug through the clutter until he found an old notebook, the kind with a leather cover that someone had given him as a birthday gift years ago. He had never used it. It still had the price tag on the back. He ripped off the tag, sat down, and for the first time in his life, Ethan started writing his goals. Not wishes, not dreams. Goals. Specific, clear, measurable goals. He wrote, Number 1, get in shape. Lose 20 pounds in the next 6 months. Number 2, complete an advanced certification in digital marketing within 3 months. Number 3, read at least 2 books every month. Number 4, save $5,000 by the end of the year. He stared at the list. It was short. It was simple. But it felt enormous. Each goal was a mountain he had never tried to climb before. After writing them down, he closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair. A strange feeling washed over him. It was not excitement exactly. It was more like relief. Like he had finally admitted to himself what he wanted, and just the act of writing it down had made it feel real. But relief was quickly followed by doubt. Can I actually do this? He thought. I have never finished anything I started. What makes this time any different? The next morning, Ethan decided to start with his first goal, getting in shape. He set his alarm for 6 in the morning. When it went off, he groaned, reached for his phone, and hit snooze. Just 5 more minutes, he told himself. Those 5 minutes turned into 45. When he finally opened his eyes and looked at the clock, it was already 6:45. He had missed his window. Are you kidding me? He said out loud, throwing the blanket off in frustration. Day 1, and I already failed. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment. But then he remembered something. He reached for the book on his nightstand and flipped to a section he had read the night before. There it was, right there on the page. Failure is a part of the process. Do not be discouraged by small setbacks. Focus on getting back on track. Ethan read it again, and then again. Slowly, the tightness in his chest began to loosen. He took a deep breath and said, Okay, so I missed this morning. That does not mean I have to miss tomorrow. That evening, Ethan did something he had never done before. He went to a store, bought a large whiteboard, and hung it on the wall of his studio apartment, right next to his bed, where he could see it every single morning. On it, he wrote his 4 goals in big, bold letters. Next to each goal, he drew small boxes. Each box represented a day. Every time he completed a task related to that goal, he would put a check mark in the box. It was a simple system, almost too simple, but there was something powerful about seeing those empty boxes staring back at him every morning. They were a silent challenge, a dare. The next few days were rough. Waking up early felt like torture. His body was not used to it. His mind kept finding excuses. It is too cold. You did not sleep well. You can start next week. But every time he was about to give in, he would look at that whiteboard and see those empty boxes, and something inside him would push him forward. On the 4th day, he actually made it out of bed at 6:15. He put on his running shoes, stepped outside into the cold Chicago morning, and jogged to the park 3 blocks from his apartment. The air was sharp and crisp. The trees along the path were painted in shades of orange and red. A few other early risers were out walking their dogs or jogging. Ethan ran for about 10 minutes before he was completely out of breath. He stopped, bent over, hands on his knees, panting like he had just run a marathon. 10 minutes. That was all he could manage. But when he got home and put that first check mark on the whiteboard, something happened. He felt a small spark of pride. It was tiny, almost insignificant, but it was there, and it was real. He went back to the book that evening and read the next part of the first chapter. It said something that made perfect sense. Break your goals into smaller, manageable steps. A big goal can feel overwhelming. Ethan looked at his fitness goal, lose 20 pounds in 6 months. That felt massive, impossible even. But what if he broke it down? What if instead of thinking about 20 pounds, he focused on losing 1 pound per week? And what if instead of trying to run 5 miles on day 1, he just ran for 15 minutes, then 20, then 30? Suddenly, the mountain did not seem so tall. He grabbed his notebook and started breaking each goal into weekly and daily tasks. For fitness, week 1, jog 15 minutes every morning. Week 2, increase to 20 minutes. For his marketing certification, spend 45 minutes each evening studying. For reading, 20 pages before bed every night. The book's first chapter was becoming his personal guide. He kept coming back to it, rereading sections, underlining key passages, writing notes in the margins. But life has a way of testing you right when you start to get comfortable. About 2 weeks into his new routine, Ethan's phone rang. It was his mom calling from their family home in Wisconsin. "Ethan, you have not called in 2 weeks. Your father and I have been worried. Is everything okay?" The guilt hit him like a wave. He had been so focused on his goals, so consumed by his new routine, that he had completely neglected his family. He had not called his parents. He had not texted his sister. He had not even replied to his brother's messages. He talked to his mom for over an hour that night. She told him about his dad's doctor appointment, about the neighbor's new puppy, about the church fundraiser she was organizing. And for the first time in months, Ethan actually listened, really listened. After the call, he sat in silence for a long time. He realized something important. Setting clear goals was not just about career and fitness. It was about everything: relationships, family, friends, health, all of it. He opened his notebook and added a 5th goal. Call mom and dad at least once a week. Stay connected with the people who matter. That night, as he reviewed his day before going to sleep, a habit he had started just a few days ago, Ethan felt a sense of progress he had never experienced before. It was not dramatic. It was not a lightning bolt moment. It was more like a quiet warmth spreading through his chest. The feeling of finally moving in a direction. Any direction. The book's first chapter had taught him something profound. Goals are not just things you write down and forget about. They are commitments you make to yourself. They are promises. And the act of keeping those promises, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard, that is where discipline begins. Ethan closed his notebook, looked at the whiteboard on his wall, and counted the check marks. There were not many yet, but each one represented a small victory, a moment where he chose to show up instead of giving up. He smiled to himself and whispered, "This is just the beginning." And he was right, because the first chapter of Sheldon Howe's book was only a glimpse of what was to come. There were more lessons waiting for him, more challenges, more failures, more growth. But for the first time in his life, Ethan was ready. He turned off the light, pulled the blanket over himself, and for the first time in a very long time, he fell asleep with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Develop a routine. The next few weeks were a roller coaster for Ethan. Some days he felt unstoppable. He would wake up early, crush his workout, get to the office on time, and come home feeling like a completely different person. But other days, the old Ethan would creep back in. He would oversleep, skip his jog, binge watch shows until 2 in the morning, and wake up the next day drowning in guilt. It was this inconsistency that frustrated him the most. He had the goals. He had the motivation. He even had the whiteboard staring at him every morning, but something was still missing. There was a gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it consistently. One evening, after a particularly unproductive day where he had spent most of his time at work, staring at his screen without accomplishing anything meaningful, Ethan came home feeling defeated. He tossed his jacket on the chair, microwaved some leftover pasta, and sat on his bed, eating in silence. His eyes drifted to the book sitting on his nightstand. He had been so focused on the first chapter that he had almost forgotten there was more to read. He wiped his hands on a napkin, picked up the book, and opened it to the second chapter. The title read, "Develop a Routine." Ethan let out a small laugh. "Of course," he said to himself. "Goals without a routine are just wishes on a whiteboard." He started reading, and within the first few paragraphs, he felt that familiar sensation of being seen. The author wrote that creating a consistent daily routine helps in building habits that reinforce discipline, that a structured schedule minimizes distractions and promotes productivity by allocating specific times for tasks. Ethan thought about his own daily life and almost winced. His schedule was a disaster. There was no structure to his days at all. He woke up at different times every morning. Some days he ate breakfast. Some days he skipped it entirely. His work hours were supposed to be 9 to 5, but he often arrived late and stayed late to compensate, which threw off his entire evening. Weekends were even worse. He would sleep until noon, spend the afternoon doing nothing, and then suddenly panic on Sunday evening because he had wasted 2 entire days. The book put it simply. Without a routine, your day controls you. With a routine, you control your day. That line stuck with Ethan. He read it twice, then grabbed a pen and underlined it so hard the ink bled through to the next page. He thought about the most successful people he admired, athletes, entrepreneurs, writers. What did they all have in common? They all had routines. They did not wake up each morning wondering what to do. They had a system, a blueprint for their day that they followed regardless of how they felt. Ethan realized that his biggest problem was not laziness. It was chaos. His life had no structure, and without structure, even the best intentions crumble. He put the book down and grabbed his notebook. At the top of a fresh page, he wrote in capital letters, "My daily routine." Then he started filling it in. 6 in the morning. Wake up. No snooze button. Feet on the floor within 60 seconds. 6:15 to 7. Exercise. Jogging on weekdays. Bodyweight workout on weekends. 7 to 7:30. Shower and get ready. 7:30 to 8. Breakfast. A real breakfast. Not a granola bar eaten in the car. 8:30 to 12:30. Deep work. The most important tasks of the day. No phone, no social media, no distractions. 12:30 to 1:30. Lunch break. Actually step away from the desk. Go outside if possible. 1:30 to 5. Afternoon work. Meetings, emails, collaborative tasks. 5:30 to 6:30. Personal development time. Study for the marketing certification, learn something new, work on a side project. 6:30 to 7:30. Dinner and free time. Decompress. Call a friend or family member, 7:30 to 9. Reading, reflection, journaling, 9:30. Wind down, no screens. Prepare for tomorrow. 10. Sleep. Ethan stared at the schedule. It looked beautiful on paper, clean, organized, efficient. Every hour had a purpose. Every block of time was accounted for. But he knew the truth. Creating a routine is the easy part. The hard part is actually following it. He took a deep breath and made a decision. I am going to give this one honest month, he told himself. 30 days, no excuses, no negotiations. If it works, great. If it does not, at least I tried. The next morning was Monday. His alarm went off at 6. The room was dark. The October chill had crept through the windows overnight, and his bed felt warmer and more inviting than ever. Every cell in his body was screaming at him to stay under the covers. But then he remembered the rule he had set for himself. Feet on the floor within 60 seconds. He started counting in his head. 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached 40, he threw the blanket off and swung his legs over the side of the bed. His feet hit the cold hardwood floor, and he gasped. I hate this, he muttered. But he was up. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and looked at himself in the mirror. His eyes were puffy. His hair was a mess. But he was standing, and that was more than he could say for most mornings over the past few years. He put on his running shoes and headed out. The streets of Lincoln Park were quiet. A light fog hung over the neighborhood, and the streetlights cast a soft golden glow on the sidewalks. Ethan jogged slowly, his breath visible in the cold air, his muscles stiff and resistant. By the time he got back to his apartment, he was sweating and breathing hard. But there was a flicker of energy in his chest that had not been there before. He showered, made himself scrambled eggs and toast, sat down at the table, and ate without looking at his phone. That last part was harder than the jogging. He got to work 15 minutes early that day. His colleague, Sarah, looked at him with wide eyes. You are here early? Did something happen? Ethan shrugged. Just trying something new. The morning flew by. With his phone tucked away in his bag and his email closed, Ethan was able to focus on his work in a way he had not experienced in months. He finished a report that had been sitting in his drafts for over a week. He organized his project files. He even started brainstorming ideas for a campaign his team had been struggling with. By lunchtime, he had accomplished more than he usually did in an entire day. He went outside for lunch, something he almost never did. There was a small park across the street from his office with a bench under a large oak tree. He sat there eating a sandwich, watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs, and for a brief moment he felt something close to peace. The afternoon was good, too. Not as productive as the morning, but solid. He got through his meetings without zoning out, replied to all his pending emails, and even helped a junior colleague with a presentation. When 5 o'clock came, Instead of rushing home to collapse on his bed like he usually did, he stayed at his desk for an extra hour to work on his marketing certification course. The office was quiet. Most people had already left. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of a cleaning crew. He got home at 7, made a simple dinner, called his mom for 15 minutes, and then sat down to read for an hour. By 9:30, he was winding down. By 10, he was in bed with the lights off. Day 1 of the routine was complete. He did not celebrate. He did not post about it on social media. He just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something quiet and unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was satisfaction, the simple, honest satisfaction of having lived a full day with intention. Day 2 was harder. Day 3 was even harder. By day 4, Ethan was exhausted. His body was not used to this level of activity, and his mind kept rebelling against the structure. During his afternoon work block on Thursday, he caught himself reaching for his phone at least 15 times. Each time, he forced himself to put it back down. On Friday evening, he almost broke. His friend Marcus called and invited him to a bar downtown. "Dude, it is Friday night. Come have some fun. You have been acting weird lately." Ethan hesitated. Going out would mean breaking his routine. It would mean staying up late, probably drinking too much, and definitely not waking up at 6 on Saturday morning. But Marcus was his closest friend, and Ethan missed hanging out. He thought about the book, about what it said about discipline, and then he made a decision that surprised even himself. "I will come," he said, "but I am leaving by 10. Marcus laughed. "Who are you, Cinderella?" But Ethan was serious. He went to the bar, had one beer, talked and laughed with his friends for a couple of hours, and at 9:45 he stood up and said goodbye. His friends gave him a hard time about it. They called him boring. They said he was overthinking everything. But as Ethan walked home through the cool Chicago night, he did not feel boring at all. He felt strong, because for the first time in his life, he had made a choice based on what mattered to him in the long run, not what felt good in the moment. The next morning, Saturday, he woke up at 6:15. He was a little tired, but he was there, feet on the floor, running shoes on, out the door. By the end of the first week, Ethan had followed his routine 6 out of 7 days. Not perfect, but closer to perfect than he had ever been. The second week was when things started to click. The resistance was still there, but it was getting quieter. His body was beginning to adjust to the early mornings. His mind was learning to focus during the deep work blocks, and the structure, which had initially felt like a cage, was starting to feel more like a framework, a scaffold that held his day together and gave him room to build. The biggest change, the one that caught him off guard, was what happened at work. His manager, David, called him into his office on a Wednesday afternoon. Ethan walked in expecting some kind of criticism. That was what he was used to. Instead, David looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and genuine respect. "Ethan, I have to ask, what is going on with you lately? The work you have been putting out the past 2 weeks has been outstanding. The campaign proposal you submitted yesterday was one of the best I have seen from anyone on this team. And you have been on time every single day. Did you switch to a new coffee or something?" Ethan smiled. "No new coffee, David. I have just been working on some discipline." David nodded slowly. "Well, whatever you are doing, keep doing it." That conversation lit a fire inside Ethan that burned for days. It was proof, real, tangible proof that the routine was working, that all the early mornings and the uncomfortable structure and the saying no to distractions were actually producing results that other people could see. But the routine was not just about productivity. It was changing Ethan's relationship with himself. Before the routine, his evenings were a wasteland. He would come home from work and enter what he called zombie mode, mindless scrolling, binge-watching, eating junk food, going to bed at some random hour and waking up feeling like he had been hit by a truck. Now his evenings had purpose. He would come home, cook a simple meal, spend time studying or reading, and then journal for 15 minutes before bed. The journaling was something he had added on his own, not from the book, but from a YouTube video he had stumbled upon. Every night, he would write 3 things he was grateful for and 1 thing he wanted to improve the next day. It was during one of these journaling sessions that Ethan had a small but important realization. He wrote, "I am grateful for the routine because it has given me something I never had before, a sense of control over my own life." That hit him hard. He sat there staring at the words he had just written, and for a brief moment his eyes stung. Not because he was sad, because he was relieved. For the first time in his adult life, he did not feel like a passenger in his own story. He felt like the driver. But life has a funny way of reminding you that no plan is bulletproof. About 3 weeks into the routine, Ethan hit a wall. It was a random Tuesday. Nothing bad had happened. There was no crisis, no emergency, no dramatic event. He just woke up and felt absolutely nothing. No motivation, no energy, no desire to get out of bed. The alarm went off, and he lay there staring at the ceiling, completely empty. He thought about all the check marks on his whiteboard. He thought about David's compliment. He thought about the progress he had made, and none of it mattered. In that moment, he just did not care. He hit snooze twice, 3 times. He finally got out of bed at 7:30, skipped his workout, skipped breakfast, and dragged himself to work feeling like a fraud. That evening, he came home and went straight to the book. He needed something, anything, a reason to keep going. He found it in a paragraph he had not paid attention to before. A routine can sometimes feel like a burden. Allow some flexibility to accommodate unexpected events. Flexibility. That was a word Ethan had not considered. He had been treating his routine like a military schedule, every minute accounted for. No room for error. No room for being human. He realized that his approach had been too rigid. He had set the bar so high that the moment he fell short, he felt like a complete failure. But the book was saying something different. It was saying that a routine is not a prison. It is a guide, and guides allow for detours. Ethan sat with that idea for a while. Then he opened his notebook and made some adjustments. He added what he called buffer zones to his schedule, 30-minute blocks with nothing assigned, time he could use however he wanted, to rest, to think, to call a friend, to do absolutely nothing. These buffers were not laziness. They were breathing room. He also created a minimum viable routine for bad days. On days when he had absolutely no energy, instead of abandoning everything, he would follow a stripped-down version. Wake up. 10-minute walk instead of a jog. 1 hour of focused work instead of 4. 5 pages of reading instead of 20. The idea was simple. Even on the worst days, do something, anything, because doing something, no matter how small, maintains the chain. And the chain is everything. This adjustment changed everything for Ethan. The pressure he had been putting on himself eased. He stopped seeing his routine as an all-or-nothing challenge and started seeing it as a daily practice. Some days he would perform at 100%. Some days he would perform at 50%. And on rare, terrible days he would perform at 20%. But even 20 was infinitely better than 0. Over the next few weeks, the routine settled into Ethan's life like a second skin. It stopped feeling forced and started feeling natural. He no longer had to fight himself to get out of bed. His body woke up at 6 on its own, sometimes even before the alarm. He no longer dreaded the deep work blocks. His mind had learned to enter a state of focus almost automatically. The most surprising benefit, the one Ethan had not expected at all, was what the routine did to his free time. Before, when his entire day was unstructured, his free time felt empty and guilt-ridden. He would sit on the couch watching television, but instead of enjoying it, he would be thinking about all the things he should be doing instead. Now, because his productive hours were clearly defined and his tasks were getting done, his free time actually felt free. When Saturday afternoon came and he had already completed his workout, his study session, and his reading, he could sit on the couch and watch a movie without an ounce of guilt. He had earned it. One Sunday morning, Ethan was sitting in his favorite coffee shop near his apartment, a small place called The Daily Grind, with exposed brick walls and jazz music playing softly in the background. He was reading the newspaper, sipping a cappuccino, and watching people walk by through the window. A young woman at the next table was typing furiously on her laptop, looking stressed and overwhelmed. Papers were scattered everywhere. Her coffee had gone cold. She reminded him of himself just a few weeks ago. Ethan thought about saying something, about telling her that there was a book that might help, about sharing what he had learned about routines and goals and discipline, but he decided against it. Some lessons, he thought, people have to find on their own. Instead, he just smiled to himself and took another sip of his cappuccino. That evening, back in his apartment, Ethan stood in front of his whiteboard and counted the check marks. There were dozens of them now, row after row of small, satisfying ticks, each one a tiny monument to a moment where he chose structure over chaos, discipline over comfort, progress over stagnation. He opened a book one last time that night and read a passage that perfectly captured what he was feeling. A routine does not make your life boring. It makes your life intentional. And an intentional life is the most exciting life there is. Ethan closed the book and set it on his nightstand. He looked around his apartment. The dishes were done. The desk was organized. His running shoes were by the door, ready for tomorrow morning. The whiteboard was covered in check marks. Everything was in its place, including Ethan. He knew there were more chapters to read, more lessons to learn. The routine was just the foundation, but it was a solid one, strong enough to build on. He turned off the light, lay back on his pillow, and listened to the distant sounds of Chicago at night. Cars passing, a siren somewhere far away, the muffled laughter of neighbors through the wall. For the first time in a very long time, the noise did not bother him, because inside everything was quiet, And in that quiet, he found something he did not even know he was looking for. Peace. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, tomorrow. Chapter 3. Embrace self-control. Ethan had been riding a wave. The routine was working. His productivity was up. His confidence was growing. His whiteboard was filling up with check marks like a scoreboard in a game he was finally winning. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something real. But life does not hand you victories without testing whether you deserve them. It started on a Wednesday. Nothing unusual about the day. The sky was gray, the kind of flat, heavy gray that Chicago wears like a uniform in late October. Ethan had a solid day at work. He finished his tasks ahead of schedule, had a productive meeting with his team, and even got a nod of approval from David during a presentation. Everything was clicking. When he got home that evening, he was tired but satisfied. He changed into comfortable clothes, heated up some leftover chicken and rice, and sat down at his desk to work on his marketing certification course. That was the plan. 45 minutes of focused study, then some reading, then bed. But as he opened his laptop, something caught his eye. A notification. A new season of a show he used to love had just dropped on Netflix. All 8 episodes. Available right now. Just 1 episode, he told himself. I will watch 1 episode while I eat, and then I will study. You already know where this is going. 1 episode became 2. 2 became 4. And before Ethan realized what was happening, it was 11:30 at night. He had been glued to his screen for nearly 5 hours. His certification course sat untouched. His reading time was gone. His carefully planned evening had evaporated like steam from a forgotten cup of coffee. When he finally turned off the laptop and looked at the clock, a wave of shame crashed over him. He glanced at the whiteboard. The empty boxes for today's evening tasks stared back at him like accusations. "What is wrong with me?" he said out loud, his voice sharp with frustration. "Everything was going so well, and I just threw an entire evening away for a stupid TV show." He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The worst part was not the wasted time. The worst part was how easily it had happened, how quickly he had abandoned everything he was building for a moment of mindless entertainment. It was like his discipline had a trap door, and all it took was one temptation to fall right through it. That night, he could not sleep. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening in his mind. He kept asking himself the same question. Why? Why did I give in so easily? I knew what I was supposed to do. I had a plan. I had a schedule. And I threw it all away the moment something shiny appeared on my screen. He reached for the book. It was almost midnight, and his eyes were heavy, but he needed answers. He flipped past the first 2 chapters and landed on chapter 3. The title read, Embrace Self-Control. The very first line made his breath catch. It said that self-control is essential to resist temptation, that resisting short-term pleasures in favor of long-term goals is the foundation of disciplined living. Ethan read that sentence 4 times. Each reading felt like another layer of armor being placed around a part of him that had been dangerously exposed. "This is my biggest weakness," he admitted to himself. "I am good at making plans. I am getting better at following routines. But the moment temptation shows up, I fold like a cheap lawn chair." He kept reading. The book went deeper. It said that distractions are everywhere, and they often disguise themselves as harmless breaks. But every small temptation adds up to derail your progress. That word, disguise, stuck with Ethan, because that was exactly what had happened. The TV show did not announce itself as a threat. It did not come with a warning label that said, "This will destroy your evening and make you feel terrible about yourself." It came disguised as a harmless little treat, a reward for a good day, just one episode. What is the harm? The harm, Ethan now realized, was not in the episode itself. It was in the pattern. It was in the ease with which he surrendered his plans the moment something more immediately pleasurable came along. And if he could not control that impulse, no amount of goal-setting or routine building would save him. He closed the book and made a decision. Starting tomorrow, he was going to wage war on his own impulses. The first battlefield was his phone. Ethan had never really thought about how much time he spent on his phone. It was just always there, in his hand or in his pocket, a constant companion. But when he actually checked his screen time the next morning, the number made him feel physically ill. An average of 4 hours and 23 minutes per day. 4.5 hours. Every single day. Spent doing what? Scrolling through Instagram, checking Twitter, watching random videos on YouTube, reading comment sections full of strangers arguing about nothing. 4.5 hours. That was 31.5 hours a week. 126 hours a month. More than 5 full days every month. Gone. Vanished into the black hole of his phone screen. No more, he said. He sat down and went through his phone app by app. Instagram, deleted. Twitter, deleted. TikTok, which he had downloaded just to see what the fuss was about, and then spent countless hours on. Deleted. He kept only the apps he genuinely needed. Messages, phone, maps, calendar, his banking app, a meditation app he had downloaded months ago but never used. Everything else was gone. Then he set a screen time limit, 1 hour per day, total, for everything. And he enabled the setting that locked him out when the limit was reached, with no option to override it. The first day without social media felt like withdrawal, and Ethan was not exaggerating when he thought that. His hand kept reaching for his phone instinctively. During his lunch break at work, he caught himself unlocking his phone at least 12 times, only to stare at a home screen with almost nothing on it. His thumb would hover over where Instagram used to be, find empty space, and then he would put the phone down with a sigh. By the afternoon, he felt antsy, restless, like something was missing. He recognized the feeling. It was the same feeling a smoker gets when they are trying to quit. The craving was not logical. It was physical. His brain was wired to expect a dopamine hit every few minutes, and now that the source was gone, it was throwing a tantrum. But Ethan held firm. Every time the urge hit, he would take a deep breath and ask himself one question. The question he had found in the book. Is this bringing me closer to my goals or taking me further away? The answer was always the same, and the answer made it easier to resist. By the end of the first week without social media, something remarkable happened. Ethan noticed that his mind was quieter. The constant noise, the endless stream of other people's opinions and highlight reels and outrage and advertisements was gone, and in its place was something he had not experienced in years. Space, mental space, room to think, room to breathe, room to be bored. And boredom, Ethan discovered, was not the enemy he had always assumed it was. Boredom was actually the birthplace of creativity. During the gaps in his day that he used to fill with mindless scrolling, he now found himself thinking, really thinking, about his goals, about his future, about ideas for projects he wanted to pursue, about questions he wanted to explore. One afternoon, during his lunch break, instead of staring at his phone, he pulled out his notebook and started sketching out ideas for a personal blog about marketing and self-improvement. By the time lunch was over, he had 3 pages of notes and a genuine excitement that he had not felt in months. Self-control was not just about saying no to bad things. It was about making room for better things. But the real test came on a Saturday night, about 2 weeks after Ethan started practicing self-control. His friend Marcus called again. "Dude, there is a huge party tonight at Jake's place. Everyone is going to be there. You'll have to come." Ethan paused. He had been looking forward to a quiet Saturday evening. He had planned to finish a chapter of the book he was reading, work on his blog outline, and get to bed early so he could wake up fresh for his Sunday morning run along the lakefront. A party at Jake's place meant loud music, heavy drinking, staying out until 3 in the morning, and feeling absolutely wrecked for the entire next day. He knew the pattern. He had lived it 100 times. "I do not think I can make it tonight, Marcus," Ethan said. There was a pause on the other end. Then Marcus laughed, but it was not a friendly laugh. "Bro, what is happening to you? You never come out anymore. Are you joining a monastery or something?" "I am just working on some things," Ethan said, keeping his voice calm. "Working on what? Being boring? Come on, man. Live a little." The words stung. They stung because a part of Ethan, the old part, the part that craved approval and feared being left out, agreed with Marcus. What if he was becoming boring? What if he was taking this whole discipline thing too far? What if he was sacrificing his social life for goals that might not even matter in the end? For a moment, he almost gave in, almost said, "You know what? You're right. I will be there in an hour." But then he remembered a line from the book, a line that had been circling in his mind for days. Every time you resist a temptation, you take one step closer to becoming the person you want to be. Ethan took a breath. "Marcus, I appreciate the invite. I really do. And I am not trying to be difficult. I am just in a phase right now where I need to focus. I hope you understand." Marcus did not understand. He said a few more things, some of them not very nice, and then hung up. Ethan sat there for a moment, phone in hand, feeling the weight of the decision. It was not easy. Saying no to a friend never is, especially when that friend makes you feel like you are making the wrong choice. But the next morning, when Ethan woke up at 6, laced up his running shoes, and jogged along the shore of Lake Michigan as the sun rose over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, he knew he had made the right call. He ran for 40 minutes that morning, his longest run yet. And when he stopped, hands on his knees, breathing hard, watching the waves lap against the rocks, he felt something he could only describe as pride. Not the loud, boastful kind of pride, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from keeping a promise to yourself when nobody is watching and nobody would have blamed you for breaking it. Self-control started showing up in smaller ways, too. At the office, Ethan noticed that he used to eat something sweet after every lunch. It was a habit he had never questioned. A cookie from the break room, a candy bar from the vending machine, a slice of cake if someone brought one in. He never thought of it as a problem. It was just what he did. But now, with the lens of self-control, he saw it differently. These were not harmless treats. They were small surrenders, tiny moments where he chose immediate pleasure over his long-term fitness goal. One afternoon, someone brought a box of donuts to the office. They were from a bakery Ethan loved. The smell hit him the moment he walked into the break room. Glazed, chocolate frosted, maple bacon, his favorites. He stood there for a full 30 seconds, staring at the box. His hand actually twitched. His mouth watered. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him to grab one. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water, turned around, and walked back to his desk. It was such a small moment. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. But Ethan cared, because he knew that discipline is not built in grand gestures. It is built in these tiny, invisible moments where you choose who you want to become over who you used to be. The book had a line about this that Ethan loved. It said that discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. He wrote that on a sticky note and put it on his computer monitor at work. Every time his eyes drifted to it during the day, it reminded him of why he was doing all of this. As the weeks went on, Ethan's self-control grew stronger, not because the temptations disappeared. They did not. If anything, they seemed to multiply. The more disciplined he became, the more opportunities arose to break that discipline. Social invitations, late-night cravings, the urge to skip a workout, the desire to sleep in just this once. But each time he resisted, it got a little easier, like a muscle being trained. The first rep is agony. The 10th is hard. The 100th is habit. One evening, about a month into his self-control practice, Ethan had an experience that showed him just how far he had come. He was sitting at his desk, working on a particularly difficult section of his marketing certification course. The material was dense, confusing, boring even. His mind kept wandering. He could hear the television in his neighbor's apartment through the thin walls. He could see his phone sitting on the corner of his desk, silent, but somehow still calling to him. Everything in him wanted to quit, to close the laptop, grab some takeout, and zone out for the rest of the night. That was the old Ethan's move, the path of least resistance, the comfortable, familiar descent into mediocrity. But the new Ethan did something different. He closed his eyes, took 3 deep breaths, and asked himself, if I quit right now, how will I feel about it tomorrow morning? The answer was clear. He would feel terrible. He would feel like he let himself down. Again. So he opened his eyes, adjusted his chair, and went back to work. He studied for another 90 minutes, and when he finally closed the laptop, he did not feel tired. He felt alive. That was the moment Ethan truly understood what self-control was about. It was not about deprivation. It was not about punishing yourself or living like a monk. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose your actions instead of being controlled by your impulses. The freedom to build the life you want instead of settling for the life that happens to you. A few days later, something happened at work that put his self-control to the ultimate test. His company assigned him to a new project with an extremely tight deadline, the kind of project that would require late nights and weekend work for at least 3 weeks. The old Ethan would have panicked. He would have complained to his friends, procrastinated until the last minute, and then pulled a series of all-nighters to barely finish on time. But the new Ethan approached it differently. He sat down, looked at the project scope, and broke it into daily tasks. He adjusted his routine slightly, shifting his personal development hour to the weekend so he could use that time slot for the project during the week. He communicated clearly with his team about who was responsible for what, and he committed to working on his portion every single day, no exceptions. It was not glamorous. There were no dramatic moments, no last-minute heroics, just steady, consistent, disciplined work, day after day after day. And when the project was completed on time and without any major issues, his manager, David, called him into his office and said something that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. "Ethan, I want you to know that I have noticed a real change in you over the past couple of months. You are not the same person who walked into this office 6 months ago. I do not know what happened, but whatever it is working. And I want you to know that I am recommending you for a promotion." Ethan walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. Not because of the promotion, although that was nice, but because of what the promotion represented. It was proof that self-control works. That saying no to the easy things and yes to the hard things actually leads somewhere. That discipline is not a sacrifice. It is an investment, and the returns are real. That night, Ethan sat in his apartment holding the book in his hands. He flipped to a page he had dog-eared weeks ago. On it was a passage he had read so many times the words were practically burned into his brain. The key to mastering self-control is to remind yourself of your bigger goals whenever a temptation arises. He smiled. It sounded so simple. And in a way, it was simple. But simple and easy are not the same thing. Self-control was the hardest thing Ethan had ever practiced. Harder than setting goals. Harder than building a routine. Because goals and routines are things you create once and then follow. Self-control is something you have to exercise every single moment of every single day. It is a battle that never ends. But Ethan was no longer afraid of that battle, because he had learned something the book did not explicitly say, but that he felt in his bones. Every time you win the battle against temptation, you do not just make progress toward your goal. You become a different person, a stronger person, a person who trusts himself. And there is no achievement in the world that compares to that. He looked at his whiteboard one more time. The check marks had multiplied, rows and rows of tiny victories, each one a moment where he chose his future self over his present comfort. He put the book down, turned off the light, and got into bed. Tomorrow would bring new temptations, new challenges, new opportunities to give in or stand firm. But tonight, Ethan was at peace, because he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he had the strength to face whatever came next. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness. Chapter 4. Tomorrow. And somewhere in the quiet of that small Chicago apartment, the old Ethan, the one who could not say no to anything, smiled and finally let go. Practice mindfulness. Something was different about Ethan now. People could see it. His colleagues noticed it in the way he carried himself at work. Calmer, more deliberate, less reactive. His friends noticed it in the way he spoke. slower, more thoughtful, like he was actually choosing his words instead of just letting them tumble out. Even his parents noticed it during their weekly phone calls. His mom said, "You sound different, sweetheart. You sound like you are actually present." Present. That word echoed in Ethan's mind long after the call ended, because the truth was, even though he had made incredible progress with his goals, his routine, and his self-control, there was still something eating at him, something he could not quite name, a restlessness that lived just beneath the surface of his carefully structured days. It showed up at the strangest times. He would be sitting at his desk, deep in a work task, and suddenly his mind would drift. Not to anything useful, to a fight he had with a college roommate 4 years ago, to a presentation he had fumbled at his old job, to a conversation with his ex-girlfriend that still made his stomach turn when he replayed it. The memories would hit him out of nowhere like waves crashing over a wall he thought was strong enough to hold. Other times, it was not the past that hijacked his thoughts. It was the future. He would lie in bed at night, routine complete, whiteboard full of check marks, and instead of feeling satisfied, he would feel a creeping anxiety about everything that could go wrong. What if the promotion did not come through? What if his marketing certification was not enough? What if he was fooling himself and this whole discipline experiment was just a phase that would eventually collapse like everything else in his life? The past pulled him backward, the future pushed him forward, and somewhere in between, the present moment, the only moment that actually existed, kept slipping through his fingers like sand. Ethan did not realize how serious this problem was until one afternoon at the office. He was in a meeting, an important one, where his team was presenting the quarterly results to the senior leadership. David had asked Ethan to handle one section of the presentation, a section he had prepared thoroughly and rehearsed multiple times. When his turn came, he stood up, clicked to his slide, and opened his mouth, and nothing came out. His mind had gone completely blank. Not because he was unprepared, but because in the 30 seconds before his turn, his brain had spiraled into a chain of anxious thoughts. What if I mess this up? What if they think I am not qualified? What if David regrets recommending me for that promotion? He stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 4 or 5 seconds. Then he forced a smile, looked at his notes, and powered through the presentation. It was fine. Nobody commented on the pause. David gave him a thumbs up afterward, but Ethan was shaken. He sat at his desk for the rest of the afternoon, feeling like a fraud. He had frozen. In the middle of one of the most important moments of his career so far, his own mind had betrayed him. That evening, he did not go straight to his study session or his reading. He walked to the small park near his apartment, the one with the big oak tree and the bench where he sometimes ate lunch. It was late October now, and the tree was almost bare. A few stubborn leaves clung to the branches, trembling in the cold wind. Ethan sat down and just breathed. He watched his breath form small clouds in the cold air. He listened to the sounds around him, the distant rumble of the L train, a dog barking somewhere, the crunch of leaves under the feet of a jogger passing by, and he admitted something to himself that he had been avoiding for weeks. "I have been so focused on doing," he whispered, "that I forgot about being." He went home and opened a book. He knew it was time for the next chapter. He had been putting it off, partly because He had been so focused on applying the first 3 lessons, and partly because he sensed that the next chapter would ask something different of him, something harder than waking up early or deleting social media. Chapter 4 was called Practice Mindfulness. The first paragraph confirmed his suspicion. The book said that mindfulness helps in maintaining focus and reducing anxiety. That by being present in the moment, individuals can better manage their thoughts and emotions, leading to improved decision-making and productivity. Ethan read those words slowly, then he read them again. He thought about the meeting, about the freeze, about the way his mind constantly dragged him into the past or hurled him into the future, never letting him rest in the here and now. The book continued with an image that made Ethan smile despite himself. It said that the mind is like a monkey, always jumping from one thought to another. That mindfulness helps you tame this monkey and bring it to the present moment. A monkey, Ethan muttered. That is exactly what it feels like. A hyperactive monkey with no off switch. He kept reading. The book explained that mindfulness was not about emptying the mind or stopping thoughts altogether. That was a common misconception. Mindfulness was about observing your thoughts without judgment, watching them come and go like clouds passing across a sky without grabbing onto any single one and letting it carry you away. This was a radically different idea for Ethan. His entire approach to life had always been about control. Control your goals. Control your routine. Control your impulses. But mindfulness was not about control. It was about awareness. It was about stepping back from the chaos in your head and simply watching it, without trying to fix it or fight it or run from it. The next morning, after his workout, Ethan decided to try meditation for the first time. He felt ridiculous. He sat on the floor of his apartment, cross-legged on a cushion he grabbed from the couch, closed his eyes, and tried to focus on his breathing in, out, in, out. It lasted about 8 seconds. Then his mind exploded. Did I reply to that email from Jessica? I need to buy groceries. What time is the team meeting tomorrow? I wonder if Marcus is still mad at me. I should call Mom tonight. Wait, am I breathing? I was supposed to be focusing on breathing. Okay, breathe. In, out, in. Was that my phone buzzing? No, ignore it. Breathe. In, out. I am hungry. When did I last eat? Focus. Breathe. After about 3 minutes, Ethan opened his eyes and exhaled loudly. Well, that was a disaster, he said to the empty room. But he remembered what the book said. Mindfulness is not about stopping thoughts. It is about noticing them and gently bringing your attention back to the present moment. The key word was gently, not with frustration, not with self-criticism. Gently, like you are guiding a small child back to the path after they wandered off to chase a butterfly. So the next morning, he tried again. This time, he set a timer for 5 minutes. When his thoughts wandered, and they wandered constantly, he did not get frustrated. He just noticed. Oh, there is a thought about work. And then he brought his attention back to his breathing. Oh, there is a worry about the future. Back to breathing. Oh, there is a memory from college. Back to breathing. 5 minutes felt like an hour. But when the timer went off, something strange had happened. Ethan felt different, not dramatically different, not enlightened or transformed, just slightly calmer, like someone had turned the volume down on the noise in his head by a few notches. He decided to keep going. 5 minutes every morning, no more, no less. And if he felt like it, another 5 minutes before bed. The first week was brutal. His monkey mind fought him at every turn. There were sessions where he spent the entire 5 minutes lost in thought and only realized it when the timer went off. There were mornings when he skipped it altogether because he convinced himself it was not working. But he kept coming back, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The first thing Ethan noticed was that his focus at work improved, not just a little, significantly. Before mindfulness, his attention span during deep work blocks was maybe 20 to 30 minutes before he needed a break or felt the urge to check something. Now, he could sustain focus for an hour or more without his mind wandering. It was as if meditation was training his brain to stay on one track instead of constantly switching between a dozen. The second thing he noticed was that his emotional reactions became less intense. Before, when something went wrong at work, a critical email from a client, a mistake in a report, a disagreement with a colleague, Ethan's default response was to spiral. His mind would latch onto the problem and spin it into a catastrophe. One mistake would become proof that he was incompetent. One criticism would become evidence that everyone was against him. But now, with his mindfulness practice, he found himself able to pause before reacting. When that critical email landed in his inbox, instead of immediately firing back a defensive response or sinking into anxiety, he would take a breath, notice the emotions rising in his chest, fear, anger, shame, and let them pass through without acting on them. Then, from a place of calm, he would craft a thoughtful response. This shift did not go unnoticed. One day during a team meeting, a colleague named Ben publicly pointed out an error in Ethan's report. It was a minor mistake, a misplaced decimal point in a revenue forecast, but Ben presented it in a way that felt like an attack. His tone was condescending. His body language was aggressive. A few months ago, Ethan would have either lashed out defensively or retreated into embarrassed silence. Instead, he took a breath. He let the initial sting of embarrassment pass, and then he said, calmly and without a trace of defensiveness, "You are right, Ben. That is a mistake. I will correct it this afternoon. Thank you for catching it." The room went quiet for a moment. David, who was leading the meeting, looked at Ethan with what could only be described as impressed surprise. After the meeting, he pulled Ethan aside and said, "That was really well handled. Most people would have gotten defensive or flustered. You stayed completely composed." Ethan shrugged. "I have been practicing." He did not explain further. He did not need to. The results spoke for themselves, but the impact of mindfulness went far beyond the office. Ethan started noticing things he had been blind to for years. Small things. The way the morning light hit the buildings across the street, turning the windows into squares of gold. The taste of his coffee, really tasting it. The bitterness, the warmth, the way it coated his tongue. The sound of rain on his window at night, a sound he used to find annoying, but now found deeply comforting. He realized that he had been sleepwalking through his own life, not because he was lazy or ungrateful, but because his mind was always somewhere else, always replaying the past or rehearsing the future, never here, never now. One evening, his friend Claire invited him to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Wicker Park. Claire was one of the few friends who had not given him a hard time about his lifestyle changes. She was genuinely curious about what he was doing and why. Over plates of pasta and glasses of red wine, she asked, "So, what is this mindfulness thing you keep mentioning? Is it like yoga? Do you chant?" Ethan laughed. "No chanting, at least not for me. It is more like learning to pay attention, really pay attention, to what is happening right now, instead of worrying about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow." Claire tilted her head. "That sounds simple." "It is simple," Ethan said, "but simple is not the same as easy. Try sitting still for 5 minutes and just focusing on your breathing. Your brain will throw a tantrum. It wants to be anywhere except the present moment." "Why is that?" Claire asked. Ethan thought about it. "I think it is because the present moment is not always comfortable. The past gives us stories to hide in. The future gives us fantasies to escape to. But the present is just what it is. No filter, no edit. And most of us are not used to facing reality without some kind of distraction." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is actually really profound, Ethan. You sound different, like genuinely different." "I feel different," he said, and he meant it. The most profound change that mindfulness brought to Ethan's life was in his relationship with his own emotions. Before, emotions were things that happened to him. Anger would seize him, and he would lash out. Sadness would engulf him, and he would withdraw. Anxiety would grip him, and he would freeze. He was at the mercy of whatever emotional weather blew through on any given day. But mindfulness taught him something revolutionary. Emotions are not commands. They are information. You can feel angry without acting angry. You can feel afraid without running away. You can feel sad without drowning in sadness. The emotion arises, you notice it, you acknowledge it, and then you choose how to respond. This was not suppression. Ethan was not stuffing his emotions down or pretending they did not exist. He was doing the opposite. He was feeling them more fully than ever before, but he was also creating a tiny gap between the feeling and the reaction. And in that tiny gap lived his freedom. One night, about 5 weeks into his mindfulness practice, Ethan had an experience that crystallized everything he had been learning. He was sitting on his balcony, the small metal fire escape that he liked to pretend was a balcony, wrapped in a thick jacket, watching the sun set behind the Chicago skyline. It was one of those perfect late autumn evenings where the air is cold enough to sting your cheeks, but the sky is so beautiful it makes you forget the temperature. The clouds were streaked with pink and purple and deep orange. The city hummed softly beneath him. And for about 3 minutes, Ethan's mind went completely quiet. Not empty, quiet. There is a difference. He was fully present, not thinking about work, not worrying about the future, not replaying the past, just sitting there, breathing, watching the sky change color, feeling the cold air on his face, hearing the distant sounds of the city he called home. And in that silence, he felt something he had been chasing his entire life without knowing it, a sense of wholeness, a feeling that, right now, in this exact moment, nothing was missing. Nothing needed to be fixed or achieved or acquired. Everything was already enough. It lasted only a few minutes. Then a car horn blared, and his mind snapped back to its usual chatter. But those few minutes changed something inside Ethan. They showed him what was possible. They gave him a taste of what life could feel like when you stop running from it and start living in it. He went inside and wrote in his journal, "Tonight I watched the sunset and felt complete. I did not need anything. I did not want anything. I just was." I think this is what the book means when it talks about being present. It is not a technique. It is a way of being. Ethan started applying mindfulness to everything, not just meditation and sunset watching. Everything. When he ate without his phone. He tasted the food. He noticed the textures. He chewed slowly. Meals that used to be 5-minute refueling stops became 15-minute experiences. When he talked to people, he listened, really listened. Not the half-listening he used to do, where his eyes were on the person, but his mind was composing his next sentence. Full, genuine, undivided attention. He looked people in the eye. He noticed their expressions. He heard not just their words, but the feelings behind the words. The effect on his relationships was immediate and profound. His mom told him during one of their weekly calls, "Ethan, I do not know what has gotten into you, but talking to you these days feels so different. It feels like you are actually there, like you actually care about what I am saying." "I always cared, Mom," Ethan said. "I just was not very good at showing it." His friendships improved, too. Even Marcus, who had been distant since Ethan started turning down party invitations, began to come around. One afternoon, Marcus texted, "Hey man, want to grab coffee this weekend? Just coffee, no party, I promise." They met at a cafe near the lake. Marcus was surprised by how different the conversation felt. "You are actually listening to me," he said at one point, half joking. "Usually when I talk, I can see you are thinking about 10 other things." Ethan smiled. "I have been working on that." At work, mindfulness gave Ethan an edge that he had never had before. When the pressure was high and deadlines were tight, he did not crumble. He breathed, he focused, he broke the problem down into pieces and addressed each one with full attention. His team started coming to him when they were stressed, not because he had the answers, but because his calm was contagious. Just being around someone who was not panicking made them feel like everything was going to be okay. David noticed this too. In Ethan's next performance review, he wrote something that Ethan kept as a screenshot on his phone for months. Ethan has developed a remarkable ability to remain composed under pressure. He brings a clarity and focus to his work that elevates the entire team. But perhaps the most important thing mindfulness taught Ethan was how to deal with his own inner critic. That voice in his head that had spent years telling him he was not good enough. That voice that whispered failure every time he made a mistake. That voice that compared him to everyone else and always found him lacking. Mindfulness did not silence that voice, but it taught Ethan to recognize it for what it was. Just a voice, just a thought, not the truth, not reality. Just a pattern his brain had learned to repeat over the years. Now, when the critic spoke up, Ethan could hear it, acknowledge it, and let it pass. "There is that thought again," he would say to himself. "The one that tells me I am not good enough. I see it, I hear it, and I am choosing not to believe it today." It was a small shift, but it changed everything. One evening, as he sat reading the last pages of the mindfulness chapter, Ethan found a line that he carefully copied into his journal and then wrote on a piece of paper that he taped to the wall above his desk. It read, "The present moment is the only place where life truly exists. Learn to live in it." He stared at those words for a long time. Then he closed the book, placed it on his nightstand, and looked out the window. The city light sparkled against the dark November sky. Somewhere out there, millions of people were living their lives, worrying about tomorrow, regretting yesterday, missing the miracle of right now. Ethan did not want to be one of those people anymore, and thanks to this one simple practice, he did not have to be. He took a deep breath, held it for a moment, and let it go. Then he whispered, 2 more chapters to go, but right now, this moment is enough. And it was. Learn from failures. Stay consistent. Ethan was flying. There was no other word for it. 4 chapters into Sheldon Howe's book, and his life looked nothing like it had 2 months ago. He had clear goals pinned to his whiteboard. He had a routine that ran like clockwork. He had self-control that would have been unimaginable to the man who used to binge Netflix until midnight on a Tuesday. And he had a mindfulness practice that had turned the volume down on the chaos in his head and replaced it with something close to clarity. From the outside, Ethan's transformation was remarkable. His manager, David, had officially recommended him for a promotion. His fitness had improved dramatically. He had lost 12 pounds. He was running 4 miles without stopping. His marketing certification was nearly complete. He was reading 2 books a month, sometimes 3. His relationships with his family and friends were stronger than they had been in years. Everything was going right, which is exactly when everything went wrong. It started with a project, a big one, the biggest Ethan had ever been assigned. His company was pitching a major campaign to one of their largest clients, a retail chain that was considering switching to a competitor. David put Ethan in charge of the analytics portion of the pitch. It was a huge vote of confidence. It was also a massive amount of pressure. Ethan did what he always did now. He broke the project into smaller tasks. He created a timeline. He coordinated with his team. He scheduled daily check-ins. He applied every principle he had learned from the book: goals, routine, self-control, mindfulness, all of it. For the first 2 weeks, everything went smoothly. The data was clean. The analysis was sharp. The presentation was shaping up to be one of the best the team had ever produced. Ethan was confident, maybe too confident, because he missed something, a small error in the data set, a misalignment between 2 sources that skewed the projections by nearly 15%. Ethan had reviewed the numbers multiple times, but the error was buried deep in a spreadsheet that had been compiled by a junior team member. He trusted the numbers without double-checking the underlying data. He did not catch the mistake, but the client did. During the pitch meeting, the client's chief financial officer pulled up the projections on screen and said, "These numbers do not match our internal data. Can you explain the discrepancy?" The room went silent. David looked at Ethan. The junior team member looked at the floor. Ethan looked at the screen and felt his stomach drop. He could see it now. The error, right there in column F, row 47. A number that should have been a percentage, but was entered as a whole number. A tiny mistake that had cascaded through the entire analysis like a crack in a foundation. Ethan tried to recover. He acknowledged the discrepancy, offered to revise the projections, and promised to deliver corrected numbers within 24 hours. But the damage was done. The client's confidence was shaken. The pitch, while not a complete failure, did not land the way it should have. After the meeting, David called Ethan into his office. He was not angry. He was worse. He was disappointed. "Ethan, I put you on this because I believed you were ready. What happened?" Ethan did not make excuses. He did not blame the junior team member or the data or the timeline. He looked David in the eye and said, "I missed it. It was my responsibility, and I missed it. I am sorry." David nodded. "Fix the numbers, deliver the revised pitch by Friday, and learn from this." Ethan walked out of that office feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under him. All the progress he had made, all the discipline, all the growth, and he still failed. The old thoughts came rushing back like a flood breaking through a dam. You are a fraud. You got lucky for a while, but this is who you really are. You cannot handle real responsibility. You will always fall short. He went home that evening and did something he had not done in weeks. He sat on his bed in the dark, doing nothing, not reading, not studying, not journaling, just sitting there, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on him like a physical force. After about an hour of this, he reached for the book. Not because he wanted to, because he needed to, because without it, he was afraid the spiral would pull him all the way back to where he started. He opened to Chapter 5. The title read, "Learn from Failures." The first line cut through his self-pity like a blade. It said that failure is not the end. It is a stepping stone to success. That discipline involves learning from setbacks rather than being discouraged by them. Ethan read on. The book said that every failure carries a lesson, that it is up to you to find it and use it to grow stronger. He put the book down and stared at the ceiling. "Okay," he said to himself. "What is the lesson here?" He grabbed his notebook and started writing. Not goals this time. An autopsy. A detailed, honest examination of what went wrong and why. He wrote, "I trusted data I did not personally verify. I delegated a critical task without proper oversight. I was so focused on the big picture that I neglected the details. I let confidence become complacency." Each admission stung. But there was something liberating about writing it all down. It was like draining poison from a wound. Painful, but necessary for healing. The book had another line that stuck with him. It said that failures often happen because of overlooked details. That the purpose of reflection is not to blame yourself, but to improve. Ethan underlined that word. Improve, not punish, not shame. Improve. He had spent most of his life treating failure as a verdict, a final judgment on his worth as a person. But the book was offering a different perspective. Failure is not a verdict. It is feedback. It is the universe telling you where the cracks are so you can fill them before the next earthquake. Over the following days, Ethan threw himself into fixing the pitch. He went through every single number in the data set personally. He cross-referenced every source. He checked and double-checked and triple-checked until he was certain that every figure was accurate. He rebuilt the projections from scratch. And on Friday morning, he delivered the revised pitch to David. David reviewed it carefully. Then he looked up at Ethan and said, "This is excellent work. Better than the original, actually. The level of detail here is impressive." Ethan nodded. "I learned a lot this week." David smiled. "That is exactly the point." The revised pitch was sent to the client, and 2 weeks later, the company won the account. The client's CFO even sent a personal email complimenting the thoroughness of the revised analysis. David forwarded that email to Ethan with a single line. See? Failure is just the first draft. That line became another sticky note on Ethan's monitor. But the lesson of learning from failure did not just apply to work. It applied to everything. A few days after the pitch incident, Ethan had a setback in his personal life, too. He had been maintaining his morning workout routine almost perfectly for weeks. But one night, he stayed up late finishing the last module of his marketing certification course. He was so close to completing it that he could not stop. He pushed through until 1:30 in the morning, finally submitted the last assignment, and collapsed into bed. When his alarm went off at 6, he could not move. His body felt like it was filled with concrete. His eyes refused to open. He hit snooze once, twice, 3 times, and finally woke up at 8:15, just in time to throw on clothes and rush to work. He missed his workout. He missed his morning routine, and the old guilt came flooding back. But this time, instead of letting the guilt consume him, he applied the lesson from Chapter 5. He asked himself, "What happened, and what can I learn from it?" The answer was simple. He had sacrificed sleep for productivity. And while the certification was important, burning himself out was not sustainable. He needed to respect his body's limits, even when his ambition was pushing him forward. He made a new rule for himself. No work past 11 on weeknights, no exceptions. Not even for something as important as a certification. Because a disciplined life is not about doing everything. It is about doing the right things at the right time. And rest is one of those things. The book had a line about this too. It said that discipline is not about being perfect every day. It is about bouncing back after setbacks. Ethan wrote that in his journal and circled it 3 times. Bouncing back. That was the real skill, not perfection, resilience. He added a new section to his whiteboard. He called it Lessons Learned. Every time he failed at something, no matter how small, he would write down what he learned from it. Within a few weeks, that section was full, and each lesson, each small piece of wisdom earned through failure, made him a little bit stronger, a little bit wiser, a little bit more prepared for the next challenge. One evening, about a week after the pitch incident, Ethan was at a coffee shop working on his blog when he ran into an old college friend named Jamie. They had not seen each other in years. Jamie looked tired, worn down, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix. Over coffee, Jamie told Ethan that he had been going through a rough patch. He had lost his job, his relationship had ended, and he was struggling to find motivation to do anything. "I just feel like everything I try ends in failure," Jamie said, staring into his coffee cup. "So, what is the point of trying?" Ethan listened, really listened. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "Failure is not proof that you cannot do something. It is proof that you tried. And trying is the only thing that separates people who eventually succeed from people who never do." I know that sounds like a motivational poster, but I mean it. I have failed more in the past 2 months than I did in the entire year before, and those failures taught me more than any success ever could. Jamie looked at him skeptically. "When did you become a philosopher?" Ethan laughed. "I read a book." That conversation stayed with Ethan for days. It reminded him that the lessons he was learning were not just for him. They were universal. Everyone fails. Everyone struggles. The difference is in how you respond. And that brought him to the final chapter of the book, the chapter that tied everything together. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of quiet, still evening where the world seems to pause and catch its breath. Ethan was sitting at his desk, the book open in front of him, a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside his laptop. He turned to the last chapter and read the title, Stay Consistent. He almost laughed. Of all the lessons, this one seemed the most obvious. But as he started reading, he realized it was actually the most important, because without consistency, everything else falls apart. The book said it plainly. Motivation gets you started, but consistency keeps you going. Even on days when you do not feel like it, showing up matters the most. Ethan thought about his own journey, the mornings he did not want to get out of bed, the evenings he did not want to study, the workouts he did not want to do, the meals he did not want to cook, the phone calls he did not want to make. On any given day, there were a dozen reasons to quit, a dozen excuses to skip just this once, a dozen justifications for taking a day off, a week off, giving up entirely. But he had not quit. He had shown up, not perfectly, not every single time, but consistently enough that the small daily actions had compounded into something significant. 12 pounds lost, a certification earned, a promotion on the horizon, stronger relationships, a calmer mind, a life that finally felt like it was going somewhere. The book made a distinction that Ethan found incredibly powerful. It said that most people confuse motivation with discipline. Motivation is a feeling. It comes and goes like the weather. Some days you wake up feeling like you can conquer the world. Other days you wake up feeling like you cannot conquer your own blanket. If you rely on motivation to drive your actions, you will only act on the days you feel like it. And those days, let us be honest, are not as frequent as we would like. Consistency, on the other hand, is a decision. It is the decision to do the thing regardless of how you feel, not because you are a machine, not because you do not have emotions, but because you have made a commitment to yourself, and keeping that commitment matters more than your temporary comfort. Ethan had lived both sides of this equation. Before the book, he was entirely motivation dependent. He would get excited about a new goal, ride the wave of enthusiasm for a few days, and then crash the moment the excitement faded. His life was a graveyard of abandoned projects and half-finished plans. But now he understood that the magic was not in the excitement. The magic was in the mundane, in the boring, repetitive, unglamorous act of showing up and doing the work day after day after day, long after the initial thrill had worn off. He thought about the athletes he admired, the writers, the entrepreneurs. They did not succeed because they were more talented than everyone else. They succeeded because they were more consistent. They did the work on the days when nobody was watching. They practiced when they did not feel like practicing. They kept going when everything inside them screamed to stop. That was the secret. Not talent, not luck, not some magical formula, just consistency. Ethan closed the book and sat in silence for a long time. The apartment was quiet. The city outside his window hummed its low, familiar song. He looked at his whiteboard. The check marks had spread across the entire board. Rows and rows and rows of tiny victories, each one representing a moment where he chose to show up. He thought about who he was 2 months ago, the man who could not wake up on time, The man who scrolled through social media for 4.5 hours a day. The man who had no goals, no routine, no self-control, no presence, and no resilience. That man felt like a stranger now, a ghost from a previous life. But Ethan knew that the ghost was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. The old habits had not been destroyed. They had been overwritten, and overwritten files can sometimes resurface if you are not careful. That was why consistency mattered so much. It was not just about building new habits. It was about maintaining them, protecting them, defending them against the inevitable pull of comfort and complacency. He opened his journal and wrote what would become the most important entry he had ever made. Discipline is not something you achieve. It is something you practice every single day. It is not a destination. It is a direction. And as long as you keep moving in that direction, even slowly, even imperfectly, you are winning. The only way to lose is to stop. He stared at those words for a long time. Then he closed the journal, placed it on his desk, and walked to the window. It was late November now. The first snow of the season was falling, light, delicate flakes drifting down from a dark sky, catching the glow of the streetlights and turning them into tiny stars. The streets below were quiet. A couple walked by, huddled together under an umbrella, laughing about something. A car passed slowly, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Ethan watched it all with the kind of attention he had learned to give to ordinary moments. The beauty of it struck him, not because the scene was extraordinary, but because he was finally present enough to see it. He thought about his mom. He would call her tomorrow and tell her about the promotion which David had officially confirmed earlier that week. He thought about Marcus, who had texted him that afternoon with an unexpected message. "Hey, I have been thinking about what you said about discipline. Can you recommend that book?" He thought about Claire, who had started her own mindfulness practice after their dinner conversation. He thought about Jamie, who had sent him a text the day before saying he had started setting goals for the first time in his life. Ethan had not set out to inspire anyone. He had just been trying to fix himself. But it turns out that when you change your own life, you give other people permission to change theirs. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, watching his breath form a small cloud that disappeared into the cold air. Then he turned away from the window, picked up the book one last time, and read the final passage. It said that discipline is not the goal. It is the journey. Keep going, and you will find that success becomes a habit, not a destination. Ethan closed the book gently, almost reverently, and placed it on the shelf next to his bed. Not on the nightstand anymore, on the shelf, because it was no longer something he needed to reach for in moments of crisis. It was part of him now. The lessons had moved from the pages into his bones. He looked around his apartment, the whiteboard covered in check marks, the journal full of reflections, the running shoes by the door, the clean desk, the organized kitchen, the quiet, steady order of a life lived with intention. This was not the apartment of the man who had ordered a book on a desperate October night 2 months ago. This was the home of someone who had done the hardest thing a human being can do. He had changed, not perfectly, not completely. He still had bad days. He still made mistakes. He still felt the pull of old habits and the whisper of self-doubt. But the only difference that truly mattered, was that now he kept going. He showed up. He did the work. He faced the failures and learned from them. He stayed consistent, and that made all the difference. Ethan turned off the light. He climbed into bed, pulled a blanket up to his chin, and looked out the window one last time. The snow was still falling, soft and silent, covering the city in a thin white blanket. Somewhere out there, someone was lying in their own dark apartment, scrolling through their phone, feeling stuck and lost and wondering if things would ever change. Ethan wished he could tell them what he had learned. That change is possible, that it starts with one decision, one goal written in a notebook, one morning where you drag yourself out of bed even though every fiber of your being wants to stay under the covers, one moment where you say no to the easy thing and yes to the hard thing, one tiny step forward, followed by another and another and another. It is not glamorous, it is not fast, it is not always fun, but it works. He closed his eyes and smiled, not a big smile, a quiet one, the kind that comes from knowing deep in your heart that you are finally on the right path. And the path does not end here. It never ends. That is the whole point, because discipline is not something you finish. It is something you live every single day for the rest of your life. And that, more than anything else, is how you become the person you were always meant to be. Good night, Ethan. Tomorrow is another day, another chance, another step, and you will be ready. So, friends, that was today's book summary. How did you like it? Let us know in the comments. And thank you for staying until the very end.